Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. It's my first one, so we'll see how it will work out, but I hope you'll enjoy it. I picked out a few games that I talked about in my...
My name is Grandmaster Mesgan Amalov. I'm a professional chess coach and the creator of ImproveMyChess.com. If you're currently struggling with your chess development, I've designed a complete program. Grandmaster Mesgan Amalov.
Okay, sorry.
So in recent days, I'm sure most of you have been following the World Championship match going on in New York City. And in spirit of that, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about some games of some other world champions that I talked about in my video series, The Polgar Method. So welcome everyone and enjoy. Ask questions through typing them, and I'll try to answer as much as I can. I'll ask some questions as well, so be ready to think and try your best, whatever you think the best ideas may be, and we'll have fun. Okay, so now we'll go over to the chessboard, and we're right here. Hopefully it will work. Okay, excellent. So, okay. Here we are. So let me go back to the beginning where I want to be. Okay, so this is a game played between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov. Of course, as you know, they had a long rivalry ever since the mid-1980s through the 1990s. And this game has been played in 1990 in the match that was split between New York City as well as Lyon, France. And this was game 17, kind of as a curiosity. The two contenders today playing in New York City, Magnus Carlsen and Sergey Karjakin, are both born in that year. So just give you the historic perspective. But let's talk more specifically about this position and this game, and let's learn from what happened here. So first of all, I will ask a question, why to move, and what would you think should be White's plan, and what is important really in this position. So whenever you see a position in front of you, let's say if you're trying to learn something, you should try to think on what you would do before you look at the book, let's say, or a video, or alternatively during a game when there is a drastic change in the position. Let's suppose the c-pawns got just exchanged and the dynamic of the position changed drastically. It's important to evaluate what's going on. So why don't you think for a little bit, maybe 10-20 seconds, what should be White's game plan right now and what should be Black's? So right now, I'm not seeing yet too many comments, but I guess we'll move on a little by little. What's good for White in this position? White has control of the only open file, the C file. Okay, I see you guys can see the moves. Okay. So Mahi is saying White's plan should be to push the central pawn majority. That could be one of the plans indeed, to potentially create a passed D pawn by pushing D5, E5, and then D6. That's a reasonable idea, definitely. I'm sorry that you're seeing all these moves. Let me see if I can somehow switch it. I'm not quite sure how. In any rate, what else? As I mentioned, White's key strengths in this position is the control of the C file, as well as being very strong in the center of the board. So one key issue is that the black knight can jump onto C4, having the support of the pawn on B5 pretty much at any point, and how to deal with that. So let's look at what White did. So the first move of Karpov was D5, not Queen C2, but D5. But let's talk about Queen C2. Why not Queen C2? Because it's a very natural move, right? Trying to then enter to the 7th rank to C7 with the queen. The problem with that is that the knight can come to C4. And then if knight D2, the issue is that the pawn on D4 would be hanging, and that's not a good thing. So D5 was played, and that's one of the actual special talents and masteries of Karpov, that he was amazing and still is amazing in preventing the opponent's counterplay and ideas. So yes, that's a very legitimate question, Kisan, that it opens up the diagonal of the black bishop. Very true. At the same time, the bishop has really nothing to target on that diagonal at the moment, and it's more important for White to gain support to the C6 square, as you will very soon see. It's really important. Also, there can be situations later when White would follow with the other plan of playing E5 and D6. So yes, it's true, the black bishop got improved by this move, but it's not a priority at this moment. Okay, so black can still play knight c4, and in fact, black did play knight c4 in the game. It's important to understand the little tactics that justify the strategical plan of White in this particular case, that if black would want to just oppose White's rook to trade rooks, the problem is that White immediately would win a pawn. And an important detail to pay attention to, that after a queen c1 check, king h2, queen c7, kind of forking the white king and bishop, now White can just push the pawn, stop the check, and protect the pawn all at the same time. So let's go back to the game. After d5, indeed, black played knight c4. So Henry was suggesting bishop f4 with rook c7. That could be an idea, but since the knight is on c4 now anyway, we first need to do something else to reopen up that c file. And it's very important to hurry up and do it quick while we can. And White played knight d2. So this kind of attacks the knight on c4. If the knight would stay there, obviously White would capture the knight and win a pawn simply. So now black needs to decide whether to move the knight or to trade the knight on d2. So right now, in the game, black traded the knight, and I think it probably was a better idea to keep the knight on the board. I think largely to control the c6 square. And then our silicon friends suggest a very interesting but probably good idea, playing h6, bishop e3, and g5 to prevent f4, White's f4 idea. So I see Mahi is asking, why not knight d2? I guess you mean right away, knight d2. Right away, knight d2 is a possibility as well. Probably black may then kick the bishop. And if the bishop goes back, then be able to play rook c8. I would think that was the reason why white played rather d5. Okay, so again, came d5, knight c4, knight d2. Black chose to trade the knights, which I think improves now white's position. So here it's an important decision also, what to take back with, the bishop or the queen. And, you know, there is the famous saying that chess is 99% tactics, which of course is somewhat of an exaggeration. But nevertheless, without tactics, tactics always trump strategy. So that strategy needs to be justified by the little tactics that are there to support it. And you'll see in the next couple moves what I mean. So here you would think that it's more logical to take back with the queen to maintain the pressure on the pawn on e7. But yet white took back with the bishop. So I see there is a discussion between you whether why is it bad for white to trade the rooks. It's not the issue of trading the rooks, it's the issue of giving up control of the c file or maintaining control of the c file. That's the issue. So you would think that now black is happy because black is able to come to c8. But as I said, the issue is not about trading the rooks, it's about keeping the pressure, the control of the c file. And now Karpov played a beautiful move. White played rook to c6. It's a very important move because, again, it's based on tactics. If now black would try to win the pawn by grabbing the pawn on c6, the problem is the pin being used on the back rank. So rook c6 is very important because then eventually white will be able to play queen c2 and either force the black rook move away or get a very dangerous pass pawn on c6. So after rook c6, black played bishop to e5. The idea is clear. Now black gets rid of the back rank problem and threatens now to take on c6. So now what to do with white? So what would you suggest right now to play with white now that the rook is hanging on c6? Queen c2 is definitely a reasonable idea. Surely that would be my first idea as well, provoking either the black rook to move away or to trade. And this is not bad, certainly not bad. The problem is that if now white would play f4, black would get a little bit of reorganizing himself with check and then retreating to c7. So again, it's not bad, but Karpov, I believe, found a more accurate way. Okay, so I see some suggestions. F3. F3 I wouldn't really like, honestly, because it weakens dark squares, and I don't see really a reason why it would stop now black just capturing the pawn. Another suggestion I'm seeing is g4. Again, same problem. That didn't stop black just taking. Bishop h6 is definitely a more logical suggestion. I see Mikhail Tal suggested it. And now black cannot again capture the pawn because of the back rank problem. True. Black would probably make a move like perhaps f6 or such to renew the threat on capturing the rook. So I see Jericho Bello found a move that Karpov played, and that's a very good move. It invites the exchange of the bishops. So now going back with the bishop to g7 would certainly not be a good idea, because, and you see it, it's a little tactic, but wins the game. White can just take, and then check, winning black's rook on c8. Okay, so let's go back. Bishop c3. Black could, of course, trade bishops, and then would be pretty much forced to also take on c6, and white would create this dangerous pass pawn on the c file. I'm seeing the question after bishop h6, bishop g7, it would have exactly the same problem as if the bishop went to c3 and bishop g7. Bishops got traded and the queen c3 check. So after dc6, queen c7, white would first bring the king. And for example, after a move like f6, the idea is to somehow get the queen to d7 and get the black queen move from there so the c pawn can promote. There's no sound. That's certainly not good. Let me see what I can do about that.
The sound is fine.
Okay, so I'm being told that sound is fine. It was just, I guess somebody may have an issue with his own sound system. Okay, so I see a question, why not taking with the queen back, I assume here. In that case, black could not trade queens because the black king would be too far from the promotion square of the c pawn. But black would just move the queen away. And the problem is that white now has no pass pawn. And therefore, wouldn't be so easy. Perhaps white could create one with then playing e5, but I don't think it's as good as taking back with the pawn. Okay, so let's move forward. After bishop c3, Kasparov tried to keep the bishop. I think this move doesn't look very nice, especially that now the white bishop is in total control of the diagonal. Potentially the black king even got into trouble as well. And that's exactly what white did. Very natural move. What do you think it should be? Anybody has an idea what white should play right now? Yes, exactly, queen d4. So queen d4 obviously threatens checkmate immediately on g7 as well as on h8. Black doesn't have much of a choice, but playing f6, preventing that. So now white has several good options. One is a very logical move. And that is keeping in the spirit of the game so far, fighting for that C file. What would that be? That was a very good question about why queen d4 and not queen h6. The reason for that is because if white would have, well, first of all, the queen was on d2, so it couldn't go to h6 in one move. It would have taken a couple moves to get to h6. But also, remember, black can stop the checkmate just as well that black did after queen d4 and f6. White wants to be flexible to play on the queen side, which has been the main strategy so far in this game, on the c file, as well as attack on the king side. If white would have moved the queen towards h6, the queen wouldn't have been as flexible to play on both sides of the board. Rook f6 would be premature in this position because black can just accept. And if nothing else, black can take the bishop and still be ahead in material, even though there may be even some stronger move. Okay. Let's go back to f6. And here queen c5 is, to me, the most logical move, forcing black again to trade the rooks. But Karpov found another move that is also very logical and moved the bishop to a5. So if you look at this position, it's important to notice that black now is threatening to take the rook. For example, if white would make just a, let's say, ignorant move and play g3, black would capture the rook and then give a fork and then capture. But the problem is that the bishop is hanging on c3. So this is one of the reasons why the bishop moved to a5. But also it's important that later on, if the white pawn gets indeed to c6 after an exchange of the rooks, white wants to control the key c7 square. It's not a key square now, but once the rooks would be exchanged and white's pawn from d5 gets to c6, it would be important. So let's see what happened. Black moved the bishop to d6, again with the same idea of blocking the white queen of getting to d8, and with that, renewing the threat to the rook, capturing the rook. Okay, so after bishop d6, again, important moment. Matti Hoch is suggesting queen c3, definitely a good move. Again, in the spirit of what we've been talking about so far throughout the game. So now black needs to make a big decision to trade or not to trade. Okay, somebody's suggesting why not bishop b4. I'm not sure if you meant in this position or earlier. Somebody suggesting bishop rook to d6. I think that would be perhaps overambitious. There is no need for this sacrifice. The black queen can come towards g7, f7, let's say, or maybe rook c1 check first, and then queen f7. I don't think the position was ready for such a drastic change, sacrifice. Queen b6 is not a bad move either in this position. Queen b6 is not a bad move at all. Probably will result in a better endgame for white as well. But queen c3, I think, is more logical, more principle, and overall a better move. So let's talk about what happens if indeed black takes. And now you can see why it's so important to have the white bishop on a5, because it will support the c7 square, and with that to advance the pawn. And the more advanced pawns are, generally the more dangerous they are. So at this stage, all white would need to do is to try to trade the queens, and then the pawn could promote. And this is how that could play out. For example, king f8, logical move, right? Trying to get the king to e8 and d7 and then grabbing the pawn. So that's why white would play queen c6 immediately, preventing the king from getting closer. And now there's not too much that black could do other than just keep waiting. King g7, now white could bring the king. Black cannot take the pawn on c7 because it would be a pin situation. Neither can the black king come closer. It looks like it's all good for black, but there is this tricky move from the back, winning for white immediately. So after king g7 in this position, white would play f4. So as you can see time after time, in order to increase the strategical advantage, it's always important to keep in mind the tactical justifications. Like right now, this is a pawn sacrifice that's justified by the move queen d8. So that's why black cannot take the pawn. And if the king just keeps waiting, then white can play f5 and then threaten with queen e6, and white would accomplish the goal. So let's go back to the game with queen c3. Perhaps that's enough explanation on why Kasparov rather chose to keep the rooks on the board. So now things still don't look as simple, because black for the moment is controlling the c7 square, and it's a big question mark. How is white making progress? I see a question going back to the position all the way in that endgame line here. And I think e5 probably is not a bad move either, but f5 is just, I mean, e5 is not a bad move, but f5 is cleaner. So going back to the game, queen c3, rook e8, and now a very typical Karpovian move, preventing the opponent's counterplay, just in case. And this is the type of position when white has the time to do so, just to improve the position, and at the same time also preventing the opponent's counterplay. I'm seeing suggested moves such as rook b6, possible, but not sure if it really makes much progress. There is one issue we need to point out, that, for example, if the queen would move to c8 and takes, white cannot take the pawn because of the back rank problem. And another move that was suggested after rook e8 was g3, I guess to get rid of any kind of back rank problems. It's a possible move, but the issue is, I think, that black wants to get a little bit more air for his queen and play b4 and then perhaps queen b5. So I think that is what white wanted to prevent and played a3. So now it was black's turn, and black's problem is that black doesn't really have a good active plan. So black was just waiting and played king g7. Now again, there are similar issues with the rook b6 and queen c8. White still has the back rank problem. And David, who suggested g3 and the earlier move, now that move was indeed played after preventing black's potential activity with b4, now indeed came the g3 as well. On one hand, preventing any kind of back rank mates, and on the other hand, potentially preparing f4 and e5, as you can see with the green arrows. King f1 instead of g3 is possible in general until there are still queens and multiple other pieces on the board. I don't prefer to get the king kind of out towards the middle of the board. Once there are only less pieces or no queens especially on the board, that's more when I would start thinking getting the king more active, let's say, towards the middle of the board. So g3, and now black played bishop e5, attacking white's queen, and white naturally moves forward. An important advice, generally, when you have a choice of moving forward or backwards, whenever you can, it's usually to your advantage to move forward. And this is the moment where Kasparov didn't realize the dangers that were ahead of him and made a mistake, made kind of another evading move. Instead, should have retreated the bishop to d6, chasing white's queen back, and then perhaps play queen a7, threatening the pawn on g3. White is still better, but and should play bishop b6. It would still take efforts to make progress. Black made a mistake by playing h5, perhaps wanting to get some counterplay with h4 or such. But now white has a very strong move that probably Kasparov underestimated during the game. Can you think of what you would do here for white? Yes, the correct move is bishop to c7. Very correct move. So white's goal is to get to the magic 7th rank, as so often that gives a pretty decisive advantage. Right now, if here black takes, white just takes back, and it's basically a fork immediately attacking black's queen, and once it moves, then take the pawn on e7. So after bishop c7, if the black bishop moves, well, it did move, so we'll see what happens. Bishop moved all the way to the corner. It's kind of a funny place for a black bishop to be there, but didn't have too many options. Could have gone to b2, but not sure if it would have made too much of a difference. So it's interesting how we saw the white bishop going kind of all around the board. Started out from g5, right? And then move to d2, move to a5, and then move to c7. Sorry, move to c7, and now finally that bishop moves back to f4. So what a journey. But the point is to, again, the c7 square, and to prevent the opponent's defense, in this case, the bishop coming back to e5. So if the bishop would have gone to a5, the black bishop could retreat and again stop the rook getting to c7. So we clearly see in this game the white bishop is being used as an aid to white's rook and queen in order to get to that magical c7 square. So by now, I'm sure you figured out the theme of this game, and that is an open file and how to take advantage of it, how to increase that advantage to win the game. And generally, when you have an open file, the next goal would be, the next step would be to get access to the 7th rank, or of course with reverse colors, it would be the 2nd rank. So this is one of the games that I'm analyzing in my video series, the Polgar method, which, by the way, is available for just the next 12 hours with a 65% discount. So if you like this webinar or just my style of teaching, You may want to check it out, and the link to the discount coupon you can find in the description to this webinar. So going back to the game, after bishop f4, black played queen to d7. There's nothing black could have done in stopping the rook from getting to c7, but at least with the hope that now black can hang on to the pawn on e7. I see a question here, why not d6? Well, d6, black can just take, I would think. Bishop takes still looks quite good for white, I have to admit. I guess the king would move somewhere. Looks pretty good for white as well. I have to agree with that. King must move probably somewhere. So, okay, so let's get back to where we were. Bishop f4. One thing that you can notice in many of Karpov's games, and by the way, when I started playing chess in the mid-1970s, Karpov was ruling the world of chess. Well, Fischer was there too, but he kind of retired basically in 72 before I started playing chess. So I grew up in the 70s and throughout the 80s, the dominance of Karpov. And what I was so impressed about is how he was strangling his opponents, how he was taking away all their counterplay. And even when there are two moves that, objectively speaking, are maybe equally good, or sometimes even another move may be even better based on the computer's evaluation. But humanly speaking, practically speaking, by taking away counterplay from the opponent is just so crucial. And I played Karpov many times myself, and I managed to win one game and drew, and I had many other games. But in some of the games that I lost, I felt it on my own skin, how he's preventing my counterplay, and it's really remarkable, and we can all learn a lot from him. So you may wonder what happens if black would take on h3. Then white would just take, and the black king gets in trouble, checkmate on g7, and even if that bishop from the corner tries to defend the checkmate, again, one of those preventive moves, controlling the opponent moves, e5, and that's it. So after rook c7, queen d8, hanging onto the pawn on e7, but now the problem is the pin. And that is simple with d6. So now black is basically lost. Here are the remaining moves of this game. g5. Now again, typical Karpov style. He could have played bishop g5, which the softwares agree that was winning. Not too difficult either. But he just went without risk. No sacrifice needed. Just d7. And getting the bishop over to a5. And once the queen needs to leave the promotion square of the d pawn, that pawn will just promote. And at this stage, Kasparov resigned. Not surprisingly, that move 40, because in many time controls, and specifically in that World Championship match, it was, I believe, 2.5 hours for 40 moves. So the magic 40 moves time control was reached, and therefore Kasparov understood that now that Karpov gets more time, is no longer in time pressure, he will have no problems finding the next few moves to promote that c-pawn. For example, if after rook b7, black tries to win that pawn, white could just now play bishop e3 and then bishop b6, and white wins easily. So you can see how even at the end, even though he had perhaps by the computer an objectively better move with the bishop g5, he chooses the safer, the way when he squeezes the opponent, doesn't give air to breathe, and doesn't give counter chance. Okay, so I see a question. I saw this game before, but can't remember exactly the analysis. How can GMs remember those? It's a question by Jericho. Let's say an analysis like this, it's really nobody can remember. I'd be surprised if even Karpov would remember it if I ask him today. I mean, he would remember the important points about it, I'm sure. And that's what you should walk away with as well, all of you. That what were the important parts in this whole session so far, in this whole game, right? This is where we started. The importance of open files, right? In this case, it was the C file. The importance of, let's say, if you're black, in trying to counter it and get your own rook also occupying the file, which would result in either a trade of rooks or would result in a balance of the occupation, right? If, let's say, there would be still the other pair of rooks on the board, sometimes it would just stand there, right, with the black rook, let's say, on c8, and if we would have additional pair of rooks on the back rank, neither side would really have advantage on that open file. It would be balanced. The problem, as you remember here, was that the rook is too busy protecting the pawn on e7, and black couldn't get there. Then the next step is, from white's perspective, was to get further ammunition on that file, get the queen there. Black, of course, was trying to prevent it or close down that file altogether, and that's why it was so important to trade the knights. And as you saw, little by little, white gained full control of the c file, and the next step, almost always, when you control an open file, the goal is to get to the 7th rank, usually because the opponent would have a number of pawns on that 7th rank, right? Like right now, you would see 3 black pawns on the 7th rank, and therefore they can become target of attack, as we saw later on in the game, all the way when finally the white rook got to c7, and then eventually, indeed, that very e7 pawn got in trouble after white used the pin. So that is really the general idea of this game, of this example. I see another question: how to calculate continuation? How do we calculate continuations? A question by Mahi. Well, another important issue. In chess, there are 2 types of positions. There are ones that do not require much calculation. Let's say this position. It's a matter of judgment call. It's a matter of understanding what's important in the position, right? You may calculate literally 2 plies, right? Which means 1 pair of moves, 1.5 pair of moves. Does trading the rooks give me anything immediate, anything good? Other than that, you need to understand what the opponent wants to do and just need to make a judgment call move. And that is, let me maintain the pressure on the C file. That's really very little to calculate. There is no reason to go to very in-depth calculations on how and if white will win this position. You deal with it when you get there. At the same time, for example, there was a position here. This was important to calculate. Before white could play this move of bishop a5, it was important to calculate to the depths, understanding that black cannot win the pawn because white just grabs the bishop. So when there are moves that are captures, when there are moves that are checks, or some immediate threats such as fork or skewer or such, those are the type of positions when you do need to calculate. And then there are most other positions, like for example in this position, there is nothing to calculate. You may consider for a moment, should I take on d6 and on f6? But chances are you will walk away with there is no need for something like that. There is no immediate checkmate. White can just simply improve his position little by little. I'm seeing a question, I'm 18 and I want to become a GM, but my current online rating is 1400. Please help. Should I give up my dream to become a GM? Wow, that's quite a question by Immortal Vazir. Well, it depends on your situation. Most people, when they are 18, they need to think about a career, need to think about making a living. So that's, of course, I think comes first. As much as you may love chess or may have ambitions in chess, it's important to be realistic. For some lucky people who can afford not needing to get a career or making a living for being, let's say, independently wealthy already, you can give it a try. It definitely takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to become a GM. I would say normally for most people, it takes a 10-year project. And with that, you need to work a lot and efficiently. It's possible. So definitely for even adults, it's possible to become a GM. However, for most adults, and 18, I would consider an adult, they don't have that luxury because they simply need to get a career, they need to pay the bills, they eventually will want to have a family. And in order to do that, it's just not practical because you're so far away from becoming a GM. And to be honest, to be a good living in chess, even as a GM, you will need to be a top GM, like top 20 or so. Unless you're independently wealthy, I would suggest try to go for a career and keep enjoying chess on the side. I see a question, blah, blah. How do you get good in blindfold chess? That's an excellent question. Perhaps you heard of Timur Gareev, who is the king of blindfold chess. In fact, I think he's doing a big exhibition in Las Vegas pretty soon. It's a matter of practice. If you don't know how to play blindfold chess at all, I would start with baby steps. I think it's really important, actually, not just in order to be able to play blindfold chess, but to visualize, calculate better during a regular game as well. And in fact, that's one of the things I teach ever since I started teaching. We started out with my sisters back in the days. Later on in the chess center I ran for 13 years in New York City, as well as at SPICE at Webster University today when I run the Susan Polgar Institute for Chess Excellence. You would start out, as I said, with baby steps. Visualize an empty board and try to see that A1 is black, then B1 is white, C1 is black, D1 is white, and so on. Get to a point on an empty chessboard where if somebody tells you what color is E6, you would immediately know that it's white. Or if somebody tells you what color is B4, you would know that it's black. So for me, the easiest method was always to simply go from A1 is black, then B1 must be white, since the colors are alternating, right? Then you would, after that, try to have little games on an empty board blindfoldly. Let's say, how can you get a knight from G1 to C3 the quickest way, right? Or what are all the legal moves from a knight from G1, right? It's H3, F3, E2, and so on and so on. And then slowly you would build up to simple exercises on how to checkmate in one move with just 3 pieces on the board to more difficult ones. So once you improve your basic visualization, then you can start to memorize some games of really short games of 6, 8, 10 move games, and so on and so on. So little by little, by adding more and more pieces to an empty board, you improve your visualization skills. And that's how you eventually learn to play a full blindfold game, and at a relatively high level as well. Okay, I see another question that is it necessary to have coaches to get a 2000 plus rating? Is it necessary? No. Is it helpful? Yes. The beautiful thing is, unlike when I was starting out in chess, that there is such a thing as the internet. There is such a thing as chess videos, like, for example, my Polgar method that you can take advantage of until midnight Eastern time today with a 65% discount. All these things are available regardless where you live. And there are also chess software that you can practice against. So really, you can do a lot of the study on your own with resources available out there. And you can also learn from your own mistakes. The chess software that you can play against, also you can do infinite analysis that will tell you what your mistakes were, and not only that, what you should have played instead. So really nowadays, I think that is the reason why we see a surge in talent showing up from all around the world, from places in the world that were, let's say, 30, 40 years ago, cut away from knowledge in chess, cut away from opportunities in playing, in practicing, because if in somebody's village or town, there were no chess clubs or no chess masters, who would they play with? You know, it wasn't so simple to travel maybe hundreds of miles to get to a chess club where there were strong players. So today there are countless servers out there where people can gain that experience, play 24/7 online, or just simply get a software that's just out there at all times. You buy it once and you can use it pretty much forever. Okay, if I do private tutoring, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, at this point, I do not. I am too busy running the Spice Institute, and I only coach pretty much at Spice. But you can learn, of course, through my videos that are out there. The Polgar method, as I said, is a 10-volume video series that covers opening suggestions for both black and white. It covers middle game strategy and tactics, planning. It covers end games. So it pretty much covers everything. Of course, it's not interactive, but I may consider in the future doing some similar webinars in the future as well. Another question I see is how to learn opening theory. Well, that's an important question, and that's one I get a lot. I really think that depending what your level, openings are overrated. Openings become really important for the more serious player as of competitively once you reach around the master level. That's when openings can become really serious, really important. Let's say if you rated 1200, you rated 1400, I strongly suggest that the time where you should spend most of your efforts in chess would be in the middle game and the end game. As I mentioned earlier, tactics are super important, because it doesn't matter how beautifully you play the game, if at some point in the game you miss a tactic, you may lose a pawn, you may lose a piece, you may get checkmated, and all that small strategical advantages that you accumulated for 30, 40 moves, they go down the drain. Once you get, as I said, 2000 plus, that's when I would start more seriously learning openings. Okay, what's the other question we have here? Would you say that an online rating, say on chess.com, is comparable to a USCF rating? Well, I'm not exactly familiar with all the different servers, but I know that in many that I've seen, they generally are much higher than the USCF ratings, usually hundreds of points higher. Again, it depends on the exact time control, but at large, there is a lot more inflation online in online ratings for one reason, that people can play hundreds of games, thousands of games in those shorter time controls than they would in a USCF rated, especially classical rated games. So usually the USCF ratings would be a lot lower of people than it would be on any online servers typically. I see a question. We'll be able to see any tall style in a World Championship match. I certainly hope so. I very much hope so. So far, I think the two players were feeling each other out, being cautious, which is for partly understandable, of course, getting used to the venue and just the whole ambiance of the championship. But it's also somewhat both of their styles. They are not generally the type of players that would play like Shirov or Tal, who would burn bridges behind themselves. But nevertheless, I think as we move forward, I'm pretty sure we'll see some more dynamic games than what we've seen so far. Okay, so actually I was planning to show a couple more games, but I, by the way, really believe that it's a lot more important to analyze and understand one game really deeply than look at multiple games and just brush through them. It's really more important to understand when you have questions, and you should have questions, try to make sure you get answers to those questions. Today in this webinar, you had the opportunity to type in questions for me to answer, and I apologize if I didn't get to answer all of them. Of course, time is limited. But even if you have a chess software, you can try to get answers from the engine. So that's the next best thing you can do if you don't have a coach or you're not part of a webinar. Let's see. I see a question from Sean Clark. Blitz is more common nowadays for people who are time poor, but I assume you can't improve too much playing Blitz only, can you? That's an excellent question. I have to admit that when I was in my developing stage of my career, I loved playing Blitz. And I remember back then in the late 1970s, 1980s, the chess community was very divided. The Soviet school of chess, Botvinnik school of chess, believed that blitz is even harmful, it's not good for you. And then there was another school of thought that no, blitz is great because you can try out more ideas, it's more efficient, it sharpens your calculation, and so on. I belong to that second group that believes that blitz is actually very useful. I'm not talking about bullet, please don't misunderstand, not 1 minute games, but I think 5 minute games are ideal, maybe 10-minute games, depending on your level. I think those are great ways to exercise. I understand that nowadays people don't have that much time. That's one of the advantages, by the way, going back to the question of the 18-year-old, if it's too late to become a GM, usually kids, when they are, let's say, 6 through 14, have just a lot more time on their hands. There are less commitments, less obligations in their lives, and therefore they can afford to spend more time on chess. So that's why it's easier for a young person to become potentially a GM than somebody in an adult age, that they simply don't have that same luxury of time to devote to the game. Okay, let's say what else to talk about. Okay, we have, how did you achieve a 2000 plus rating? It certainly didn't happen overnight. I lost a bunch of games before that happened. But I think probably most importantly, I didn't give up. I was curious to learn. I played a lot. I learned from my mistakes. And I guess eventually it matured in learn from enough mistakes to get there. Okay, Mahi Lohia is asking, how should we analyze our own chess games effectively? First of all, make sure to be objective, and the chess engines generally can help you with that. In fact, going back to the question about playing blitz, playing online, it's fine as long as that's not the only thing you do. And when you do, I strongly suggest take the PGN to one of the chess engines and analyze it. Learn from your mistakes. Don't repeat the same mistake twice. As I said, for most people, it's most important to solve puzzles to improve their calculation skills, because no matter how we cut it, especially below the 2000 mark, most games are decided by tactics, by oversight, miscalculation, by one side or the other. So tactics is really most important. And that's something you can do on your own. There are plenty of excellent tactic books out there. I have, for beginner level players, my new series of books, the Learn Chess the Right Way. For higher level players, I also have the Tactics for Champions. But whatever your level is, try to find a book that's appropriate for your level. And that definitely needs to be part of your chess practice if you want to improve. Okay, let me take a couple more questions. Can you become a GM standard by only playing online games? I would say at some point you need to deal with the psychological aspects of the game as well, and the only way to get used to it by doing it. So I think at some point it's really important to deal with the tension, the pressure, the ambiance of a chess tournament. So I think in knowledge you can maybe get close to a GM level, but ultimately theory and practice is a little bit different. So I think you definitely need to play over the board as well if you want to actually become a GM vendor. Okay, so let me try to put back the camera so you can see me for another minute. Okay, so you see me again. Hi, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the session. Even though we saw only one game, I was hoping to show more, but I think we got to talk about a lot of different issues, a lot of different questions that I got to answer. And hopefully you'll be motivated to learn a little more about my teaching. You can check out the Polgar method until midnight Eastern tonight. You can get a 65% discount, which is, I think, the biggest discount we had yet. And you can see the link to it in the description of this webinar. So with that, I'll wave goodbye to everybody. Keep enjoying chess, keep playing, and until next time, bye-bye.